I'm excited to introduce our panel for the post-film discussion, Clay Fong, Orion Lee, and Ken Albala. It's fun to see my friend Clay Fong as a moderator. I've known him for quite a while. A Dartmouth College and CU Law School graduate, Clay has co-authored an Authentic Eateries Guidebook, was the dining critic for the Boulder Weekly, and in 2013 was hired for his current position as the dining critic for the Boulder Daily Camera. Ken Albala is professor of history at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. He's written many books on food history, cookbooks, encyclopedias, reference works, and translations. And one of the leads in First Cow, Orion Lee, our other speaker, he's worked in the finance industry before retraining as an actor at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. He's also appeared in Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Justice League, and Skyfall. Welcome all, and I'm passing the mic to you, Clay.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to have such fantastic guests. And since this is a food film festival, our first question will be about food, and it's going to be directed towards Orion. And Orion, perhaps if you could comment on the food aspects of this, recognizing that you weren't necessarily cookie in this film, but nevertheless we're sort of, forming that relationship with him. If you could tell us about the food-related aspects of the film and what those were like.
Sure. As you mentioned, Cookie, John Magaro was the person who did most of the research, and I'm aware that he went through cookbooks like Lewis and Clark cookbooks and other cookbooks of the era, and he was cooking it up in his kitchen prior to coming to the set. Then just before we started the film, we did a kind of like a training camp, and with the reenactor, and he was showing us like how they make tea, and I remember something about boiling the tea, and then you grab the kind of like bucket that has the tea, and you just whirl it around and around and around in a circle so the water wouldn't drop out. But the tea leaves, I presume, would separate from the tea before pouring it out. Or was that coffee? Like I said, I'm not that great with the food side of things. I do remember, however, that there's a little scene where Cookie bakes a first good and puts it on a windowsill for me, and they were setting up to shoot it, and then we did a rehearsal, and I did my walk around, picked it up, looked at it, and bit into it, and I was like, whoa, this is actually really good. I was expecting this cold prop, which was like, made hours and hours ago, but it was like warm and fluffy and tasty, and I just wished they caught that first take, because I didn't act at all. It was just, wow, this is amazing. That's pretty much my experience, and of course, the oily cakes, which I didn't have too many of, because it is literally oil and honey, but it does taste amazing.
Great, thank you. Ken, you can speak to historic cuisine, and we're looking at kind of a specific time and place, the 1820s and the Pacific Northwest. And could you elaborate on what people might have eaten then, and does this film get it right?
Well, it does get it right in many respects. I mean, the oily cake is actually an oliekoek, is a Dutch word for a kind of donut, and it comes from the oil that it's fried in. So it's basically just a flour, sugar, milk makes a very big difference. Obviously, that's the whole theme of the movie, and it's fried in oil. And what the weird thing that kind of surprised me is that they would have oil. When people went across, they often had bear oil, they had bear grease, or they had some other kind of fat lard with them. I'm wondering like what kind of oil they would have had there. On the East Coast, of course, when they came, they would have had many, many different kinds of oil to cook with. On the other side, that would have been just as hard to find as the milk to go into a kind of any kind of donut. But in general, the interesting thing about the whole film, what it captures, and this is true of Lewis and Clark, it's true of the John Jacob Astor, settlement that came in the 1810s, and by the 1820s, it was still fur trappers basically, but they brought what they could with them that were, not perishable ingredients, and things like flour and coffee and sugar and tobacco and beans and sometimes rice, things like that they knew would never go bad as long as they kept it from rodents. They ran out of this stuff very quickly, so they had to kind of figure out, what are we going to eat now? How are we going to forage? And this was captured in the picking the mushrooms and catching the salmon and and finding whatever they could. But the interesting thing is that they didn't really want to eat the native ingredients. They didn't want to, there were plenty of things that the Native Americans ate, acorns and camas roots and berries they could identify, and that wasn't too frightening to them. But the whole panoply of roots, the koos and there's a kind of bitter root that the Europeans just didn't want to eat at all. When they came across it, didn't taste right to them, and that was true of settlement all the way through. They just imported more, European ingredients, basically, not American at all. And so they captured that. That the real anxiety among the local people was that they had European tastes and had no intention of figuring out how to live from the land apart from hunting. They did hunt because the deer and fish are fish, but apart from that, not at all.
And I understand you may know a little bit about kind of one of the currencies, which would be beaver, and how that may fit into the whole culinary picture.
Yeah, so the beavers, that was the whole reason they went there. The whole Hudson Bay Company that started all the way across Canada and all the way to the coast. Mackenzie and Lewis and Clark, the whole reason ultimately was to find sources of beaver, which went into hats. They just wore beaver hats because they're waterproof and everything. But the sad thing is that they caught them, they kept the pelts, they threw away the meat, and they never ate the tails, which are delicious. And I can tell you that from firsthand experience of cooking these on a History Channel show, which, it's mostly fat. It's basically just a tail, and then the tail is got a leathery out coating on it, but it's fat inside. But you can, the way I did it was I put it on the grill, peeled off the skin, and then battered it and put it in a pan and fried it. It's delicious, really remarkably so. But the Europeans didn't want to eat it at all.
Right. Do you put anything on that?
No, it doesn't eat it. It's just like pure unctuous fat.
Okay.
But here's the weird thing: is that all of those people ended up out of hunger at various points when the deer are not around, or bison. After they go off the plains, there's no more bison. They ate their dogs. They ate their horses far more willingly than they would have eaten wild animals that they could have gotten, which seems bizarre to me.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. Orion, I'd like to we've talked a little bit about the food, but maybe like to focus more on kind of the actor's craft and developing this film. And my understanding is not only did you do a lot of homework in, understanding the times, the dynamics, and you have this kind of finance background as well. But I'm curious, how did you go about building this character, which, in a lot of American portrayals, the sort of Asian on the frontier, it's sort of a negative stereotypical portrayal. And I just found this a very sensitive and nuanced and rather striking portrayal. So I'd like to hear about how you developed the character, how you approach the script, and what do you really see the story? What to you is this really all about?
There's an extensive background to that question. I guess, however, it starts with Kelly, Kelly's, well, actually, before Kelly, it started with John. John Raymond wrote the book, that the movie is based on, and he had an Asian friend in school. And so he wanted to write a book about friendship, and then Kelly and John wrote the script together, and from the start Kelly was interested in my natural accent, which is an accent which comes from many different places, because I was born in Hong Kong, I lived in Malaysia, I moved to Australia, studied in the UK, watched American television, and so I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures. And so she said, use your natural accent, because that is King Lu. He traveled from place to place before arriving in the Pacific Northwest on these trade ships. However, the one place which I don't have a lot of personal experience with is China. So I did change my accent slightly, ever so slightly, just to lean towards that a little bit. This is boring unless you're an actor, but the accent has an R coloring, which so they'd say, and there's certain other words, like for example, they don't, with the word W and the word R, the portion of China which I was trying to base myself out of was Northeast China, and they have problems with V, and they kind of overstate the R, so it's, instead of beaver, it's beaver. So it's just a slight thing, but I did want to add to my background this sort of section of China, and I was reading up during the beaver trade. China was in the middle of the opium trade and the opium wars and so on and so forth. So I created this whole backstory about basically. Why I'm hesitating is because sometimes I hesitate to. I love that this film is so open to people's interpretations and histories, and I sometimes hesitate to tell my version of it, because I don't want people to change their minds, of what happened. But it is, I guess, it's not within the story. So my history was. And this is the first time I'm telling it, actually, is that when I say I mean King Lu, is that when he was a kid, his father, got into opium. His mother had died early, and his sole sort of like person who looked after him was sort of slowly wasting away, and utilizing all his funds for the opium. And then when he went, he didn't have many options, and he just sort of snuck aboard a ship, and then they sort of took him on, and then that was his life. But he always sort of felt that need to escape the poverty, I guess. Which is why he's always trying to find something, some venture, something new, and it's this sort of like comes from this sort of deep need, and also that loneliness, so that when he meets, a friend, and also, but also because of that, he's also a very astute judge of character as well. But he's also mercenary, because of all like that background just created so much to draw from, because he stays in one place only so long as he can get what he wants, which to me makes the ending more sweeter because he stays because of his friend, really. Whereas most of the time he's moving from place to place to place to place, and that's what he does.
Terrific, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience that people want to address?
Well, I have a comment, if that's okay, just
Sure,
because
absolutely.
the connection of China is sort of an interesting one in that period. As you mentioned, the Opium Wars, totally. But by and large, what Americans, or people on the North American continent and Europeans wanted was tea, and spices and porcelain and things like that. And the draw in China was silver. The whole tax system had been changed to a silver economy, so people had to pay taxes in silver. So that the money that they would have been getting in Europe or South America or someplace ultimately funneled into China, and the tea went in the other direction, which is kind of interesting. And when they had furs, that was another thing they thought we could sell this to the Chinese, big population. And the castoreum, which we talked about before, is the beaver oil. It was this scented perfume. So the exotic things were definitely a draw there. But this is long, long before the railroads. It's before massive migration from Canton and the southern regions. So this was an unusual kind of people to be there at the time. The majority of the people who were there all the way from Siberia, Alaska down were Russians, and the Spanish came from the other direction and met somewhere in Northern California. So this was a weird, overland trek. People who were coming overland had never done so before then, before Lewis and Clark, really. And then a couple of expeditions went in, Jedediah Smith actually, and people who went into the Pacific Northwest for fur trapping. The Hudson Bay Company finally made it to the coast, and they were only there for furs. They didn't want a permanent settlement. They didn't want colonists. They didn't want anyone else really there at all. And this is the weird nexus of all those different cultures coming in one place at the same time, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I read something. Sorry, I did read something about one of the first trips where they used the ships, and that entry into the I don't know the exact location, the bay, was very treacherous because of the waters. And they lost quite a few people, just trying to keep the ship, on course. And but because of the trade winds at that time, once you go around bottom of Africa, you go to the Sandwich Islands, which is now called Hawaii, and then from Hawaii you move into Pacific Northwest. And so, whilst there might not have been a lot of Chinese in that area, except for King Lu, because he just lived all his life on ships. There were quite a few Hawaiians as well, because they hit Hawaii, then a whole bunch of sailors would say, you know what, that's it, I'm not doing this anymore, and a whole bunch of Hawaiians would go, you know what, I want to try this new land.
You're absolutely right. And the weirdest thing about this, the trade currents are exactly it. You can't go up the coast of California. It's impossible. You come in and then the trade winds send you all the way out to Hawaii and back again. But the Hawaii used to grow grain for the gold rush era. It was easier to grow it there and bring it to California and the Pacific coast than it was to grow it, just because there was still no overland route, and you had to go all the way around the Horn. And so it was just easier to grow things in Hawaii and bring them to the coast, which is fascinating. And there were already, there's already migration to Hawaii of Asian people.
Well, and the other piece too, and I think, both of your comments kind of allude to this. I mean, there's kind of an economic, I don't know if it's necessarily a subplot, but there's this whole notion of, like the power, the sort of monopoly power of the trading companies. And, I think Orion, you can speak a little bit to that, but, I've also seen some analysis and critiques of the film where this is kind of about the American dream, but also you see what, some of the class distinctions. Here's the guy that can afford to, bring the tea in from China and wear his, urban finery. So, I think Orion, I think you may have some thoughts on that. So maybe we can start with that and, kind of that aspect of the story and the characters.
Yeah. So I guess, having a finance background, and again, as part in that confluence with the King Lu character, I did some research during that, that time period, and really it was a bit of a rigged system because, these companies would come up, they would get there, they'd set up a fort or a camp, and then they sort of let it made that people knew, oh wow, if I caught a beaver, I could sell it for this amount, and and they're just sort of like sitting around in the land, all over the place. All I needed was a trap and a gun, and I could make it. So then people would migrate to this place, and sure enough, all that part was true, but they didn't count on the fact that if the trap was broken or they needed another trap, then they'd have to buy it from one company, one place. If they wanted, an iron pot, there's no iron mine nearby, so they had to buy it from one place. So yes, they sold a beaver, but like your average iron pot was like, I don't know. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but you had one supplier, so they set the price, and fair enough. Not fair enough, but I mean, as you expect, they made hardly any money out of doing that, even though the thing that they were selling was pretty much sort of free in the land around them.
Ken, any thoughts to build on that?
Well, I mean, to me, again, back to the film, I love that Kelly has all of that history, but she's definitely making a film about friendship. And so, all this, but the accuracy of the time gives you all of that in the background, and you can sort of see all of these things happening. But, the film isn't technically about economics.
Right.
But it
No.
So I have a question for you, because the character who played opposite you, apart from the fact that he seems to be wearing a Polish hat, and I only know that because he looks exactly like my next door neighbor who's right over there 10 feet away. Same hat and same beard structure and everything. But what was he supposed to be, Jewish from the East Coast or something like that? What was his name was Figowitz or something like that?
Cookie Figowitz. My character never asks, when I was working with John, we never really asked each other, oh, what's your background story, or how are you planning to do this scene, or we just got on set, and to me it was perfect because we had to listen to each other and just respond to each other in that moment. So to be honest, I would not be able to answer that question of where he was from and his background and all that, because we never talked about it.
Was I assume the original author had some intention by giving him that name, and and presumably he came from the East Coast somewhere, right? I mean, that was unstated. There was no other place between Missouri and there really that a white person would come from in the 1820s.
Yeah. He did say he was
But he was
apprenticed to a
hired.
baker.
Yeah, I mean, he was a baker, right? He learned from a baker, and he was hired by this trapping team
Right.
to be their cook.
Yeah.
And that's why it gets the name Cookie. But it was just, I was like reading into it all just because of the things that he knew how to do and the
Yeah.
kind of cooking that they expected from him were.
But that's again, that's one of the things I love about Kelly's films is that you know, you can see a person, and then and why I was hesitant to tell you my background is then you can have the discussion about, okay, this is what the history was. So, you know, why is this person here? Why is this person the way they are? But yeah, I've told all of you now, so.
Yeah. But I don't know. It seems authentic, though, that people in that context may not be as forthcoming. You know, oftentimes if you're in the sort of frontier kind of setting, you know, that I'd rather not say. You know, it's like joining the Foreign Legion or something like that.
Obvious prejudice.
Yeah, I do have a few comments and questions that are showing up here, and maybe I'll just share some of the comments in the question. We do have someone says, thank you for a great film. I learned tonight and the story was powerful. Another was, I love the scene where Cookie swept your hut and filled the vase with flowers. You chopped wood to make the fire. This was a spark of friendship beginning that I found very touching. So I think, you know, we have some nice feedback that this, you know, touched some folks. And then we have a food related question, which was, and I think this is, you know, directed at Orion. How was the food on set? How were the craft services?
Oh, crap. Fantastic.
Okay.
So one thing you know, actors are always hungry, or at least I am. So I you know, having a fantastic buffet every day really helps the mood.
Right. So, you know, I think we are, you know, almost to the end of our time, but so maybe I'll just leave it for both of you if you have any sort of final thoughts or observations. So, Ken, do you have any sort of final thoughts or observations that maybe as lay people we might have missed, or some nuance that would, you know, help us appreciate what was on screen a bit more?
Well, it's an obvious interaction between many different cultures in a place that was settled by people who'd always been there for, you know, a few thousand, 10,000 years or more. And the impact was so swift on the indigenous population, the indigenous flora and fauna, foodways, an entirely different people and different culture of food supplanted them within less than a generation. And I think it is amazing that, you know, this is one of the few places in the United States where there still is an indigenous population and they still do have rights to you know, hunt and fish for salmon and things. There's not many other places on Earth. And it really comes down to one very simple thing that Orion mentioned, is the currents. It's impossible to go up the coast of the West Coast. You have to go all the way out into the ocean and up on the tops. And obviously overland is still very difficult, you know, going over the mountains and everything. And so that was, I guess what I want to impress upon people is that is how northern, western California, Oregon, Washington coast was one of the last discovered places on Earth. Believe it or not, the last colonized in a bad way by Europeans. Australia is up there in the same. Actually, Australia is earlier. Australia is late 18th, early 19th century. This was a little after that. And had gold not happened and had beaver not happened, this would be as remote as New Guinea. You know, that's really what it comes down to.
Right.
Right. That's really. Gosh, just you know, thank you all for watching the movie. I think what Kelly's done is amazing because she's sort of created a movie structure which I think reflects a friendship in the sense that you know, when you first meet a friend, it's no fireworks. It's not like, you know, it's not like, oh my gosh, I love you, or I want to be with you. It's just, just two people meeting, and then they continue to spend time together, and it's just, okay, yeah, okay, and then you reach a certain point, and if that friendship ever stopped, you would feel the loss. But if you were to be, during any other point, you wouldn't even think about it. But if it suddenly stopped, you would feel that loss. And she's managed to do that with the film. During the film, it's like, oh, okay, and this thing's happening, oh, okay. And you're enjoying sort of, the atmosphere, and then it stops, and you feel that loss. And I think that's amazing, and that's what really touched me when I read the script the first time.
All right. Well, thank you,
Can I ask
Ken.
one question? As to what happened to the money? I know it was under his skull afterwards, but did the person digging up the bodies at the beginning, I don't remember this, find the money? It was in the bag.
You're asking me for another.
That's the only thing that was left in my mind. It was like, what happened to all that?
So Cookie was on his way out, as it were, but King Lu was healthy, and he gets shot, and so the person who shot him gets the money.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you both. This has been really kind of a great capstone to a great movie, and I thank both of you for sort of deepening our understanding and really appreciating all that went into the film that, we may not have been as conscious about, the attention to detail and the attention to building characters. So it's been a great experience for me, and I assume for the folks that have been in the audience tonight. And Laura, I'll leave it to you to sort of wrap things up.
Great. Thank you, Clay. I hope you all enjoyed that discussion. I know I did. I really enjoyed hearing about the baked goods, as many of us have been doing more baking nowadays. I actually found a recipe online called How to Make the Oily Cakes from First Cow. So if you're interested, it even gives a lot of background on the movie and the oily cakes. So if you're interested, just Google oily cakes and First Cow, and you'll find it. It came right up. I'd like to thank our panel, Orion Lee, Ken Albala, and Clay Fong. And thank you to all of our viewers. And that's it for tonight, but I hope you're planning on joining us for more films. Tomorrow, we're taking a deep dive into food waste with a food expert panel, an expert panel on the subject, and the film Food Fighter. We'll continue our theme of cows and meat with Sacred Cow, and I'll see you there if you come to watch that one, and indulge in some handmade pasta with funk. Good night for now, and enjoy your festival events.
Thanks all. I will sign off.
Yep. So nice meeting you all.
Nice meeting you all.
Okay, guys. Yeah.
Love that film, by the way. Really, really loved it.
Yes, thank you.
It was
You were
great.
great in it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was I learned a lot. Some of it, I don't know if I'll ever forget that image I have now of eating beaver tail, but
Yeah.
Well, if Clay or I buy some and share some beaver tail, we'll
Right.
send a photo.
Go and watch the History Channel show, Eating History.
Okay.
You can see it cooking it right over there in my backyard.
Excellent. Excellent.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
okay, that I can do. I'm
And that's on the Food Channel?
It's on History Channel.
Oh, History
Okay.
Channel.
Cooking history.
All this talking about food, I need my lunch.
Okay. Oh, it is lunchtime for you now.
It's nighttime here. I'm going
Yeah.
to sleep. Good night,
Yeah.
guys.
Well, thanks. It was a pleasure meeting all of you. Take care.
You too.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks.